Blood splattered across General William Hamilton's Medal of Honor as security chief Bradley pressed his gun against a retired general's temple during his son's military funeral at Jefferson Memorial Cemetery. Cameras flashed, capturing the white guard screaming racial slurs at the highest-ranking black retired general. Before diving into this shocking story of racism and courage, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up against systemic racism in our institutions, hit that like and subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode will reveal exclusive footage never before seen of this historic confrontation that changed America forever. 3 days before the funeral that would shake the nation's conscience, retired General William Hamilton stared through the airplane window as his flight descended toward Houston International Airport. The weight of grief pressed down on his chest like a physical force. His son, Captain Marcus Hamilton, deployed to Afghanistan, would never come home alive again. William had commanded troops through 3 wars, earned the nation's highest military honors, and risen through ranks where few black men had ever been allowed to tread. None of that prepared him for burying his only son. At 60, he straightened his decorated civilian suit with military precision, a habit formed through 4 decades of service. The medals pinned to his chest had always been his armor, but today they felt like they might crack under the pressure of his personal loss. As passengers disembarked, William noticed several fellow travelers nodding respectfully at his distinguished appearance. A young girl even asked for his autograph, her parents beaming with pride as they explained that she was meeting a real American hero. The brief moment of normalcy ended abruptly at the security checkpoint. Random additional screening required, announced Security Officer Bradley Matthews, a stocky white man with cold eyes that never quite met Williams. But I've already cleared security before my connecting flight. William explained calmly, presenting his military ID and papers. And I'm on urgent family business. Matthews smirked, examining his ID with exaggerated scrutiny. This looks fake to me. A black man as a general? How do I know you didn't steal these medals? The surrounding travelers fell silent, uncomfortable witnesses to the unfolding scene. William had encountered racism throughout his 40-year military career, but rarely so blatant. Officer, I assure you my credentials are in order. I'm here to bury my son, who died serving this country. Likely story, Matthews retorted, signaling to other security personnel. We need to verify your identity. Step aside for enhanced questioning. What should have been a 5-minute process stretched into 2 humiliating hours. The Hamilton family home in Houston's historic 3rd Ward stood as a monument to black excellence and service. Photos of 3 generations in military uniform lined the walls. Medals, citations, and honors testified to a family that had repeatedly answered their country's call despite that country's reluctance to recognize their humanity. As relatives of Marcus's fellow soldiers gathered the day before the funeral, William found a moment alone in his childhood bedroom, now maintained as a guest room. Here, surrounded by remnants of his youth, he allowed himself to weep for the first time since receiving notification of Marcus's death. A knock at the door revealed his father, Calvin Hamilton. At 85, the Vietnam veteran still carried himself with military bearing despite his weakened legs. They told me it was enemy fire that took him, Calvin said without preamble. I don't believe it for a second. William wiped his tears. Dad, what are you saying? The official report was doctored, Calvin interrupted, pulling an envelope from his pocket. This came for you 2 days ago. I nearly opened it myself. The envelope contained a thumb drive and a note in Marcus's handwriting. If anything happens to me, give this to Dad. Trust no one in uniform except him. William's hands trembled as he plugged the drive into his laptop. What appeared were dozens of meticulously organized files documenting a disturbing pattern. Black service members returning to Houston faced systematic harassment, false arrests, employment discrimination, and occasionally violence from a network of security personnel calling themselves the gatekeepers. Marcus had been investigating them for months. He said something wasn't right, Calvin explained. Said black vets were being targeted, especially officers. Started collecting stories, evidence. As William scrolled through files, a photo made his breath catch. Bradley Matthews from the airport appeared in several surveillance images, often at gatherings with other security officers. One folder labeled Command Structure contained redacted personnel files indicating the gatekeepers had access to official records and connections throughout security companies serving government buildings, military facilities, and high-profile events like military funerals. William's grief temporarily receded, replaced by a cold clarity. His son hadn't just died in combat. He'd been targeted for his investigation. A soft knock interrupted William's discovery. His daughter Amy entered with a stranger, a young Asian-American police officer, who looked nervously over his shoulder. "Dad, this is Officer James Chun. He worked with Marcus on this investigation." Chun spoke hurriedly. "Captain Hamilton contacted me 6 months ago after his friend was beaten nearly to death by security personnel during a visit to the VA hospital. The official report called it resisting restraint, but the victim was a decorated black Navy commander. Marcus recognized a pattern. Chin showed them his own badge. I've been gathering evidence from inside, but it's dangerous. The gatekeepers have members throughout private security firms, police departments, courthouse security, even military liaison offices." William's expression remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "What exactly are you saying, Officer Chun?" Chun lowered his voice. "Your son discovered the gatekeepers were specifically targeting black military personnel for harassment and worse. They see black advancement in the military as a threat to what they call proper order. Marcus was getting close to identifying their leadership structure. But that doesn't explain why he was killed in Afghanistan." Amy objected. Chin looked grim. "Captain Hamilton's last message to me suggested someone had arranged for his unit to be sent into an unsuitable position. He suspected his deployment orders were manipulated to place him directly in harm's way." William stared at a final folder on the drive, labeled Pentagon Connections. Inside was correspondence indicating someone with access to military deployment orders had deliberately placed Marcus's unit in danger after receiving communications from Houston. The implications were staggering. The gatekeepers' reach extended beyond local security into military command structures. His son hadn't just died in combat. He had been deliberately positioned to be killed. As he processed this revelation, his military training took over. "We need to secure this evidence and connect with my contacts at the Pentagon immediately." Meanwhile, inside the Houston headquarters of Elite Patriot Security Services, the company contracted to provide security for high-profile military events. Bradley Matthews sat in a wood-paneled back room with 6 other members of their inner circle. The air was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken understanding as Robert Gaines, the CEO, entered. Gaines slid photographs across the table. General William Hamilton's face stared up from official military portraits and recent surveillance photos. "Our airport welcome wasn't enough to discourage the general," Gaines announced. "He's making calls to Washington." The afternoon sun beat down on Jefferson Memorial Cemetery as William Hamilton's car approached the ornate gates. This prestigious burial ground housed generations of Texas military heroes, its manicured lawns and marble monuments testifying to sacrifices made in America's wars. William had arranged for his son to be buried with full military honors in the section reserved for Afghanistan war casualties. As a captain who died in combat and the son of a decorated general, Marcus Hamilton deserved nothing less. The cemetery director, Thomas Wells, a tall, thin man with a perpetual frown, met William at the administration building. His handshake was perfunctory, his gaze never quite meeting William's. "General Hamilton," he began stiffly, "there seems to be a misunderstanding about tomorrow's service." William straightened, already recognizing the tone. "What misunderstanding?" "Mr. Wells, the arrangements were confirmed weeks ago." Wells shuffled papers on his desk. "Yes. Well, we've had an unexpected number of services this month. I'm afraid the Valor section is at capacity. We've made arrangements for Captain Hamilton in our East Gardens area." William knew East Gardens well. It was a historically segregated section where black soldiers had been buried before integration laws forbade such practices. Despite being officially renamed, locals still called it the Colored Section. "My son will be buried in the Valor section as arranged," William stated firmly. His sacrifice entitles him to that honor under military regulations and cemetery policy. Wells's expression hardened. "General, I understand your position, but I have discretion over final placement, and I've made my decision." Before William could respond, a noise from the doorway interrupted them. A middle-aged man in a groundskeeper's uniform stood there, emotion clear on his weathered face. "Tom, you know this isn't right," the man said quietly. Wells sighed heavily. "Not now, Mike." The groundskeeper stepped forward anyway. "General Hamilton, I apologize for eavesdropping. My name is Michael Saunders. My son served with your son. Sergeant David Saunders' father? Marcus mentioned him often in his letters. David died 3 weeks before Marcus. Same region," Michael confirmed, his voice thick with grief. "They were friends. Brothers, really. Do you believe certain professions should be held to higher standards when it comes to racial discrimination?" Comment number 1 if you think security officers and military personnel should face stricter penalties for racial bias. Or number 2 if you believe everyone should be held to the same standard regardless of profession. Like and subscribe if you want to see justice prevail in this powerful story. Dawn broke over Jefferson Memorial Cemetery with solemn beauty. Golden light washing over rows of white markers honoring America's fallen. By 7 a.m., military personnel had begun meticulous preparation for Captain Marcus Hamilton's funeral. Honor Guard members practiced their precise movements, while groundskeepers ensured every blade of grass in the Valor section stood at perfect attention. Retired General William Hamilton arrived early, his dress uniform immaculate, his face a mask of composed dignity that betrayed none of the grief or apprehension beneath. As he inspected the arrangements, he noted security personnel taking positions throughout the cemetery. To his dismay, he recognized Bradley Matthews coordinating the security team. By 9 a.m., mourners began arriving. Hundreds came to honor Marcus. Fellow soldiers, veterans, family, friends, community members, and military leadership. Media vans lined the cemetery entrance. The funeral of a decorated captain, who was also the son of one of the highest-ranking black men in military history, drawing national attention. William immediately noticed the security team's behavior. Matthews and approximately 20 officers had established checkpoints at all cemetery entrances. What troubled him was their selective enforcement. White mourners passed through with cursory checks, while black attendees faced extended questioning, bag searches, and in some cases returned away for security concerns. When a group of Marcus's black unit members objected to this treatment, they were threatened with removal. By the time the funeral was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m., Matthews and his team had effectively segregated the ceremony. White attendees were seated close to the burial site, while black mourners were corralled behind barricades at a distance, many unable to properly see or hear the proceedings. William observed this orchestrated humiliation with cold fury, but maintained his composure. This was about Marcus, not the provocations of the gatekeepers. Taking his place beside his father Calvin and daughter Amy, William prepared to honor his son while the cameras rolled. The ceremony began with military precision. The chaplain spoke of sacrifice and service. Fellow officers shared memories of Marcus's leadership and compassion. Throughout, William sat ramrod straight, the perfect image of military bearing despite the visible security interference at the ceremony's edges. When it came time for him to speak, William approached the podium with measured steps. Dozens of cameras captured his image as he stood before his son's flag-draped coffin. "My son," William began, his voice strong despite his grief, "believed in an America worth fighting for, worth dying for. He believed in a country that could live up to its highest ideals of equality and justice for all its citizens." As he spoke, he noticed Bradley Matthews moving closer, speaking into his radio. Other security officers began positioning themselves around the ceremony's perimeter. Marcus saw injustice and refused to look away, William continued. He confronted inequity wherever he found it, believing that true patriotism means holding your country accountable to its promises. Mourners nodded in agreement, many wiping away tears. "His final message to me," William said, producing a letter from his pocket, "arrived after his death. In it, he wrote about his concerns regarding systematic targeting of black service members." A murmur passed through the crowd. Matthews took another step closer, his hand now resting on his holstered weapon. William read from Marcus's letter. "Dad, what I've discovered goes beyond ordinary racism. There are organized efforts to undermine black military advancement, to intimidate and threaten those who serve with honor while black. I've documented names, incidents, patterns. If anything happens to me, this information must reach the proper authorities." As he finished reading, the honor guard approached with a ceremonial folded flag. The lead soldier, a white sergeant who had served with Marcus, presented it to William with formal precision. "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." William reached for the flag with trembling hands, the first crack in his composure visible only to those closest to him. It was at this precise moment that Matthews made his move, striding forward with unwarranted urgency. He pushed past the honor guard members, his hand now drawing his weapon. "General Hamilton," he announced loudly, "you need to come with me immediately." The crowd gasped as Matthews pressed his gun against William's temple, the barrel cold against his skin. Blood from a small cut caused by the gun sight dripped onto his Medal of Honor. "This black thinks he's untouchable," Matthews snarled, loud enough for nearby mourners and microphones to pick up. "Time you learned your place." The cemetery fell into stunned silence. 20 armed gatekeeper security officers stood watching, none intervening, as their colleague held a gun to a general's head during his son's funeral. Through tears he could no longer contain, William whispered, "Not today." With military discipline ingrained through decades of service, he continued reaching for his son's folded flag, refusing to cower despite the weapon pressed against his head. His fingers had just touched the flag's edge when Matthews' partner, Officer Wilson, fired into the air while shouting, "He's reaching for a weapon!" In the ensuing chaos, Matthews tackled William to the ground, his son's flag falling into the dirt beside the grave. "Weapon! He's armed!" Matthews screamed, though William had been visibly empty-handed throughout the ceremony. Amy's voice cut through the pandemonium. "It's on video. Everything's on video." Indeed, dozens of phones and professional cameras had captured the entire incident. Nevertheless, Matthews wrenched William's arms behind his back, kneeling on his spine as he cuffed him. "Retired General William Hamilton, you're under arrest for assaulting a security officer and attempting to draw a weapon at a public gathering." The absurdity of the charge was eclipsed by the shocking visual: a decorated general in full dress uniform, face pressed into cemetery soil beside his son's open grave, being handcuffed while still crying. Calvin Hamilton, despite his age and weakened legs, lunged toward Matthews, but was immediately restrained by 2 other officers. Amy, trying to reach her father, was shoved backward so violently she stumbled into mourners. Marcus's fellow soldiers moved forward as one, their military training evident in their coordinated approach, but stopped when multiple officers drew weapons. "Anyone interferes, they go down," shouted Officer Wilson, his gun now pointed at the crowd. As William was roughly hauled to his feet, a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "What in God's name is happening here?" A tall black man in an impeccable suit pushed through the crowd, flanked by 2 individuals displaying federal credentials. "FBI Agent Dominic Carter," he announced, his badge extended. "Someone explain why a retired general is being arrested at his son's funeral." Matthews kept his grip on William's arm. "This is a private security matter." The subject was reaching for a concealed weapon. "That's a lie," shouted multiple witnesses simultaneously. 3 days later, William Hamilton emerged from detention, still in his soiled dress uniform, head high despite his ordeal. Outside the county jail, hundreds of people lined the street, many in military uniform, others holding signs demanding justice. Veterans stood at attention, saluting as he appeared. Media cameras captured his walk to freedom. Amy rushed forward, embracing her father. "A federal judge intervened," she explained. "Agent Carter got involved personally." Within hours, William stood on the steps of the federal courthouse for an impromptu press conference. Despite his ordeal, he had managed to shower and change into a fresh uniform, his medals restored to their rightful places. "I stand before you today," he began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion, "as both a grieving father and a soldier who has sworn an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What happened at my son's funeral, a funeral that remains unfinished, represents a domestic threat to the principles I had defended for 40 years across 3 continents." As he spoke, reactions poured in from across the country. Hashtags hashtag Justice for General Hamilton and hashtag Gatekeeper Exposure dominated social media. Military leaders issued statements of support. Veterans groups announced protests at security companies nationwide. During William's speech, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed the White House switchboard. Without missing a beat, William answered on speakerphone, allowing the crowd and media to witness the conversation. General Hamilton speaking. General Hamilton, please hold for the President of the United States. The crowd murmured in surprise as the President's voice emerged clearly through the phone speaker. General Hamilton, the nation has watched with horror and outrage as you've been subjected to treatment unbecoming how we should honor those who serve. I've directed the Justice Department to launch a full investigation into both your son's death and the events at his funeral. Matthews and all security personnel involved have been suspended pending federal review. 1 year later, Bradley Matthews was sentenced to life imprisonment for multiple civil rights violations, conspiracy, and his role in targeting Marcus Hamilton for harassment. Robert Gaines received 20 years for his leadership role in the Gatekeepers. Dozens of security officers across Texas faced various charges, with many accepting plea deals in exchange for testimony about the organization's activities. The most significant transformation had been institutional. Security companies now operated under new federal oversight mandating sweeping reforms in hiring, training, and accountability. Military branches had instituted new protections for service members reporting discrimination. Captain Marcus Hamilton was reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery with full honors, the President attending personally. The Hamilton Military Justice Foundation, established by William, now provided resources for service members facing discrimination, ensuring Marcus's legacy of courage and justice would endure. What would you have done if you witnessed a decorated military officer being mistreated? Comment number 1 if you record the incident to ensure accountability, or number 2 if you directly intervene to stop the injustice. Subscribe now for tomorrow's episode revealing how the Gatekeepers nationwide network was finally dismantled.